Blinded by appearances and the influence of his calculating wife, a wealthy man kept his autistic daughter chained in a squalid outbuilding among the pigs, far from prying eyes. But the family raven, a silent witness to such cruelty, plotted a dark revelation that would unmask the hidden truth. The morning at the Campbell mansion was a spectacle of opulence, yet also of a heavy silence. The sun, instead of warming, seemed only to illuminate the coldness of the polished marble. Arthur Campbell, a pharmaceutical magnate, awoke in his Egyptian silk bed, his mind already populated by stock charts and board meetings. Beside him, Eleanor, his wife, was already on her feet, impeccably adjusting a silk robe, her face serene, and an aura of devotion that Arthur had always mistaken for virtue. She was the image of the perfect wife, the pillar of his social reputation. "Good morning, my dear," she said, her voice soft, yet with a veiled inflection of authority. "I've prepared your favorite herbal tea. You have a long day ahead, and we need you to be at your best." Arthur grunted in response, already rising. "The shareholders are restless about the new project. We need to maintain the facade of stability." Eleanor nodded, serving the tea with studied grace. "And our family is the embodiment of that stability, isn't it, Arthur? An image of perfection that must be maintained at all costs. That's why we must be so careful with appearances." Her icy blue eyes met his for an instant, an implicit warning. "Remember what we discussed about Clara. Discretion is paramount for everyone's good, for our reputation." Arthur felt a slight discomfort, a pang of guilt he quickly suppressed with familiar rationalization. Yes, Eleanor. You're right. It's for her own good. To protect her from the cruel world that wouldn't understand her. Her condition. It's too delicate for prying eyes. He repeated her words like a mantra, a justification for his daughter's absence from their daily lives. Clara, his only daughter, was a well-kept secret, a blemish on the perfect tapestry Eleanor wove. Arthur convinced himself he acted out of love, out of protection, but deep down it was the fear of social judgment that drove him. Outside, perched on the highest branch of an ancient oak that dominated the estate, Corvus watched. His intelligent black eyes missed not a single movement, catching the unspoken tension between the couple, the coldness behind Eleanor's facade. He had seen Eleanor guide Arthur, subtly, with words and glances, molding reality like clay. He had seen the door to the outbuilding, a dilapidated and almost invisible structure, hidden behind a tangle of bushes and trees, which led to the pigsty. A place that Arthur, in his willful blindness, called a special facility for Clara's differentiated care. Corvus knew the sound of muffled crying that sometimes escaped from that place, the smell of dirt and despair that the wind carried. He had seen Clara's fragile figure, a shadow among the pigs, her brilliant mind imprisoned not only by her condition, but by the cruelty of those who should protect her. The raven, an unintentional guardian, felt the injustice that permeated the air, a heavy burden on the soul of that house. While Arthur prepared for another day of meetings and business, oblivious to the true nature of his daughter's care, Corvus descended from the oak. He glided over the impeccable lawn, over the rose garden Eleanor cultivated with such meticulousness, and landed silently on the outbuilding's roof. The roof was covered in moss and leaves, the wood rotting in places, a stark contrast to the impeccable maintenance of the main mansion. The dark, heavy wooden door bore a rusted padlock that seemed a symbol of neglect. Corvus pecked at the wood, a dry, insignificant sound in the vast morning silence. It wasn't time yet. Arthur was far away, immersed in his world of illusions and numbers. But with each tap of his beak on the wood, the raven's determination grew, solidifying. He would wait. He would watch. And when the right moment came, he would make Arthur Campbell see the truth his wife had so skillfully hidden. The truth about Clara, The truth about Eleanor's calculating coldness and the truth about his own blind complicity. The revelation would be inevitable, and Corvus would be its herald. Arthur Campbell finished his tea, the bitter taste of the herbs mingling with the pang of guilt that Clara's mention always brought. He rose, the armor of his tailored suit feeling a little heavier than usual. "I have a crucial meeting in the city. I can't be late," he said, more to himself than to Eleanor. Eleanor followed him to the bedroom door, the image of the devoted wife. "Of course, my love. Go and conquer the day, and don't worry about anything here. I'll take care of everything, as always." Her hand touched his arm, a gesture of affection that to Arthur felt like a seal of approval. Her blue eyes, however, conveyed a colder message, a silent reminder of the necessity to maintain order and appearances. Arthur nodded, swallowing his discomfort. He convinced himself that Eleanor was the force that kept his family and reputation intact. As he left the mansion, Arthur cast a quick glance in the general direction of the back of the property where the outbuilding was hidden. A shadow of concern crossed his face, but he dismissed it with the same speed he would dismiss an inopportune thought about a falling stock. "It's for her own good," he murmured, Eleanor's words echoing in his mind like a protective mantra. He got into his luxury car, the driver already waiting, and departed for the world of business, leaving behind the opulent silence of the mansion and the dark truth it concealed. From above, Corvus watched Arthur's car disappear down the long driveway. He saw Eleanor, for a brief instant, let her mask slip. A cold, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips as she watched the car drive away, before she turned and entered the mansion, the door closing with a final click. Her coldness was palpable, a stark contrast to the image of virtue she projected. The raven descended from the oak, landing on the outbuilding's roof again. The rusted padlock on the door seemed to mock the neglect. He pecked at the wood, a hollow sound lost in the wind. It wasn't enough. Arthur needed to be guided, not just alerted. The revelation had to be personal, undeniable. Hours dragged on. Arthur, in his downtown office, tried to focus on spreadsheets and reports, but a subtle unease accompanied him. The image of Clara, a distant and nebulous memory, stubbornly surfaced in the corners of his mind. He saw her as a small child, before her condition manifested so problematically, before Eleanor convinced him that seclusion was the only solution to protect her. He shook his head, trying to ward off the guilt. "It's for her own good," he repeated, the phrase now sounding a little emptier. In the late afternoon, Arthur returned to the mansion. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. But the beauty of the landscape couldn't dispel the melancholy that seemed to hang over the house. Eleanor greeted him with a warm smile and a glass of whiskey. "Was your day good, my dear?" she asked, her voice full of studied concern. "Exhausting," Arthur replied, loosening his tie. He headed to his study, a refuge of dark wood and old books. He had barely settled into his leather armchair when a peculiar sound caught his attention. Tap, tap, tap. It was a rhythmic, insistent sound coming from the window. Arthur frowned. He turned and saw Corvus perched on the outer sill, pecking at the glass with unusual determination. It wasn't the random pecking of a bird. There was an urgency in those taps. "Why, you insolent bird?" Arthur grumbled, tapping on the window to scare it away. Corvus recoiled slightly, but didn't fly far. Instead, he looked directly at Arthur with his intelligent black eyes, and then, with a loud, hoarse caw, flew out of sight towards the back of the property. Arthur felt a pang of irritation, but also a strange curiosity. The raven had never been so persistent. He stood up, walking to the window and looking at the spot where the bird had disappeared. A second later, the sound resumed, more distant now, but still distinct. Tap, tap, tap. It was no longer at his study window. It seemed to come from behind the house, from the direction of the wilder gardens, where the outbuilding was hidden. Arthur hesitated. Eleanor was in the living room, probably preparing dinner. He could ignore it, he could rationalize. But the raven's persistence, that repetitive, almost desperate sound, pierced his armor of denial. With a sigh of exasperation, or perhaps a curiosity he could no longer suppress, Arthur left the study. "I'm going to check the garden," he told Eleanor, who appeared at the dining room door. "That raven is bothering me." Eleanor merely smiled, an icy glint in her eyes. "Don't worry, my dear. He's probably just looking for food." Arthur didn't respond. He walked outside, the cool evening air beginning to fall. The sound of the raven's pecking grew clearer, louder, an unmistakable call. It came from the tangle of bushes and trees he had instructed the gardeners to leave untouched. Clara's special facility. He followed the sound, his heart beating a little faster. With each step, the guilt he had suppressed for so long began to bubble to the surface. The raven was there, perched on the dark, rotting wooden door of the outbuilding, pecking at the rusted padlock with a silent fury. Its black eyes fixed on Arthur, a mute and powerful accusation. Arthur stopped, his breath caught in his throat. He had never come so close to that place. The smell of dirt, of something muffled and damp, hit his nostrils, and then, for a brief instant, he heard it, a faint sound, almost a moan, coming from within, a sound he had refused to hear for so long. The raven, as if sensing Arthur's hesitation, cawed loudly and pecked at the padlock again, with a force that seemed to want to tear it from the wood. Its black eyes, fixed on Arthur's, were a mirror of the truth the man had avoided. What is this?" Arthur murmured, his voice hoarse more to himself than to the bird. He reached out a trembling hand to the door, feeling the roughness of the rotting wood. The padlock, corroded by time and neglect, seemed to mock him. A wave of nausea hit him. It wasn't the smell of pigs, not just that. It was an odor of abandonment, of contained despair. Eleanor's words, special facility, differentiated care, for her own good, echoed in his mind, but now sounded like a demon's whispers. He had been blind and cowardly. With sudden determination, driven by a morbid curiosity and overwhelming guilt, Arthur pulled at the padlock. It was rusted but seemed stubbornly stuck. He tried again, with more force, feeling adrenaline pump through his veins. The raven cawed once more, as if in encouragement, and pecked at the wood beside the padlock, almost as if indicating a weak spot. Arthur, in an act of desperation, picked up a loose stone from the ground and, with all his strength, struck the padlock. The old metal groaned, and with a dry snap, the shackle broke. The sound echoed in the falling night silence. Arthur pushed the door. It groaned, dragging on the dirt floor, revealing a damp, fetid darkness. The faint twilight barely penetrated the interior, but it was enough for Arthur to see. What he saw made his stomach churn. The pigsty wasn't just a pigsty, it was a filthy hole, with dirty straw scattered, mixed with excrement. The air was heavy, almost unbreathable, and in the darkest corner, huddled in a pile of filthy straw, was a fragile figure. Clara. She was dirty, her hair matted and dull, her face pale and emaciated. Her eyes, once full of a peculiar light, were now dull, fixed on a distant point, as if her mind had retreated to a place where pain couldn't reach her. A heavy chain, fastened to her ankle, stretched to a stake driven into the wall. Arthur staggered back, a hand over his mouth to stifle a scream of horror. "Clara, my daughter," he whispered, his voice choked. It wasn't a special facility. It wasn't protection. It was a prison, a torture. The smell of dirt, of abandonment, of urine and feces now mingled with the smell of his own guilt, a pungent and unbearable odor. Eleanor's words, for her own good, now revealed themselves as the cruelest of lies. He had been blind, blind and cowardly. Clara didn't react immediately. Her eyes slowly drifted to him without recognition. It was as if her soul had been torn out, replaced by an emptiness. Arthur stepped forward, the darkness and stench engulfing him. "Clara!" he called again, his voice trembling. A slight tremor ran through her body. Her eyes, previously vacant, blinked, and a flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed her gaze. She tried to move, but the chain pulled her back, making a metallic sound that echoed in the small prison. Arthur felt an electric shock run through his body. The chain! The chain! His daughter, chained like an animal. The image of Eleanor, with her virtuous smile and cold eyes, flashed in his mind, now in a demonic light. Her virtue was a sham, her protection was a cage, and he had been the accomplice. Outside, Corvus watched, unmoving. His mission was accomplished. The truth had been revealed. Arthur Campbell, the wealthy and once blind man, finally saw the monstrosity his wife had created, and the depth of his own complicity. The night's silence was broken only by Arthur's muffled crying, a lament of pain and regret that mingled with the smell of despair emanating from the pigsty. Arthur's muffled crying transformed into a hoarse groan, an open wound in his soul. He staggered back, his hand still covering his mouth, but now not to stifle a scream, but to muffle the sound of his own nausea. The darkness of the outbuilding seemed to swallow him, and the smell, oh, the smell! It wasn't just dirt, it was the essence of abandonment, of the silent cruelty he had allowed to flourish under his own roof. "Clara," he whispered again, his voice almost inaudible, a thin thread of sound that barely dared disturb the heavy air. His eyes, once filled with morbid curiosity, now burned with a searing pain. He saw the details his mind had refused to process. His daughter's thin, fragile body, the prominent bones beneath her pale skin, the ragged, dirty clothes that barely covered her. Her hair, once silky, was now a matted mass, full of straw and grime. And the chain that fastened her ankle to a rusted stake in the wall. That image seared itself into his retina, an indelible stain of horror and shame. He took a hesitant step inside, the dirt floor yielding beneath his feet. The raven, Corvus, remained on the doorstep, a dark and vigilant silhouette, its eyes fixed on Arthur as if to ensure he wouldn't retreat, wouldn't close his eyes again. "Clara, it's me. Daddy," Arthur tried, his voice choked. He knelt in the filthy straw, ignoring the stench that now seemed to permeate every fiber of his being. The faint twilight barely reached the corner where Clara was huddled, but he could see the emptiness in her eyes. She didn't recognize him. Her soul, he thought with a cold shock, had retreated to a place where pain couldn't reach her. He extended a trembling hand, hesitating before touching her arm. Her skin was cold to his touch, almost inert. "Clara, please, look at me." Her eyes, previously vacant, blinked slowly, and a flicker of something, fear, confusion, crossed her dull gaze. She tried to move, a slow and clumsy movement, but the chain pulled her back, making a metallic sound that echoed in the small prison. The sound of the chain, that sound. It pierced Arthur like a knife. "No!" Arthur exclaimed, his voice finally finding some strength, though still choked with pain. He leaned over the chain, trying to understand how it was fastened. It was a thick, rusted link attached to a padlock even more robust than the one on the door. "Eleanor, how could she?" The question escaped his lips like a whisper of betrayal. Eleanor's words, for her own good, differentiated care, to protect her from the world's cruelty, echoed in his mind, but now sounded like a demon's whispers, each syllable laden with poison. It wasn't protection, it was the cruelest of prisons. Eleanor's virtue was a sham, a cold and calculating mask that he, in his blindness and cowardice, had accepted as truth. With trembling hands, Arthur tried to force the chain's padlock. It was rusted, stuck, unyielding. He pulled, twisted, feeling frustration and despair grow within him. "Clara, I'm going to get you out of here, my love, I swear." Clara didn't respond. Her eyes, now fixed on Arthur, seemed to carry the weight of years of abandonment, of a solitude he could never comprehend. There was no anger, just a painful resignation, an emptiness that broke Arthur's heart into 1,000 pieces. Outside, Corvus cawed again, a hoarse sound that seemed to echo Arthur's pain. The raven didn't move, only watched, a silent witness to the unfolding tragedy. Arthur Campbell, the wealthy and once blind man, finally saw the monstrosity his wife had created and the depth of his own complicity. Arthur continued to struggle with the padlock, his hands scratching the rusted metal. He felt a cold fury begin to bubble beneath the surface of his pain. Fury against Eleanor, against her cruelty, but above all, fury against himself. He had been the monster who allowed his daughter to live like this, chained, forgotten. "I will free you," he repeated more to himself than to Clara, his voice now a lament of pain and regret that mingled with the smell of despair emanating from the pigsty. Night fell completely, and the darkness of the outbuilding seemed to deepen, engulfing him in his own guilt. He needed a tool, something to break that chain. He needed to confront Eleanor. The truth, finally revealed, was an unbearable burden, but also a flame that ignited a fierce determination in his heart. Arthur, his hands already raw from the futile effort, took a step back, his heart pounding erratically in his chest. The chain's padlock seemed to mock him, a fortress of rusted metal preventing his daughter from being free. The outbuilding's darkness was almost complete now, and Clara's figure, huddled in the filthy straw, was little more than a shadow. But her image, chained, was seared into his mind, an indelible stain of horror and shame. "Clara," he murmured again, his voice hoarse with despair. He knelt again, this time not to try to break the chain, but to be closer to her, to try to reach the soul that seemed to have retreated so far. I'm so sorry, my love. Daddy was a fool, blind. I didn't know." Clara didn't respond. Her eyes, which had earlier shown a flicker of confusion, were now vacant again, fixed on some invisible spot on the wall. It was as if she had completely shut down, an empty shell that Arthur had broken by invading her refuge of pain. The absence of any reaction, of anger, of crying, was even more devastating than any scream. It meant she had accepted it, that this was her normality. That thought pierced Arthur like a poisoned dart. A wave of icy fury rose from Arthur's stomach, replacing the nausea and guilt. Eleanor, the image of his wife, with her serene smile and gentle words, now twisted in his mind, revealing itself as the personification of evil. Special facility, differentiated care, for her own good. Each phrase was a dagger twisted in his heart. How could he have been so naive, so blind? The desire to protect his daughter, to give her a normal life away from judging eyes, had been perverted into a monstrosity. He stood up abruptly, his head spinning with the intensity of his emotions. There was no time for self-pity. Clara needed him. He needed a tool. Bolt cutters, a sledgehammer, anything that could break that damned chain. "I'll be back, Clara," he promised, his voice firmer now, though still choked with pain. "I swear, I'm going to get you out of here." He turned to leave, but hesitated, looking back at his daughter's motionless figure. Guilt crushed him. He couldn't leave her alone again, not for a minute. But he had no choice. He had to be quick. Corvus, the raven, was still on the doorstep, a dark silhouette against the last trace of twilight. Its black eyes, which had guided Arthur there, now seemed to convey a message of urgency, that there was no more time to lose. The bird cawed softly, a sound Arthur interpreted as silent encouragement, a final push. With one last look at Clara, Arthur left the outbuilding. The nauseating smell of the pigsty clinging to his clothes, to his skin, to his soul. The door creaked shut, but he didn't lock it. There was no need anymore. The true prison was within, and he was determined to tear it down. He began to run towards the mansion, the night's darkness swallowing the farm. Each step was a hammer striking his conscience. The house lights, once a beacon of comfort, now seemed a beacon of hypocrisy, a stage where Eleanor enacted her charade. He could imagine her inside, perhaps reading a book, perhaps planning her next charity event, while his own daughter rotted in a hole. The anger, previously cold, began to boil. It wasn't just the anger of a betrayed father, but the fury of a man who had been manipulated, turned into an accomplice to a heinous crime. He had trusted Eleanor, had entrusted her with his daughter's well-being, and she had turned that trust into a weapon. As he approached the house, Arthur felt the tremor in his hands, no longer from fear or nausea, but from an icy determination. He knew what he had to do. First, free Clara. Then, confront Eleanor. And then, he would make her pay. There would be no more appearances, no more virtue. The truth would be exposed no matter the cost. He took a deep breath, the fresh night air contrasting with the stench that still haunted him. The battle was just beginning. Corvus, from his perch on the outbuilding's doorstep, watched Arthur's figure disappear into the darkness. The man now saw. And vengeance, the raven thought, had a bittersweet yet necessary taste. He would wait. Arthur ran. The night's darkness swallowed the farm, but the mansion's lights, once a beacon of comfort, now seemed a beacon of hypocrisy, a stage where Eleanor enacted her charade. Each step was a hammer striking his conscience, an echo of Clara's metallic chain. The stench of the pigsty clung to his clothes, to his skin, to his soul, a constant reminder of the monstrosity he had allowed. He didn't bother with the front door, nor with wiping his feet. He burst through the back door, which led to the kitchen, with a violent shove. The thunderous sound echoed through the silent house, shattering the artificial peace Eleanor so cherished. The kitchen was impeccable as always, with the soft lavender scent Eleanor liked to use. The contrast with the smell of dirt and despair he carried was nauseating. "Eleanor," he growled, her name a poison on his lips. He didn't see her, but her presence seemed to permeate every corner of that house, a web of lies and manipulation. His eyes swept the kitchen, searching for something, anything, a hammer, pliers, a screwdriver, nothing that could break a rusted chain. His mind, previously clouded by guilt, was now sharpened by fury. He needed something more robust. The garage. He strode through the kitchen, the main hall, without even registering the opulence of the furniture or the artworks. His steps were heavy, determined, but also clumsy, as if his body was still adjusting to the new reality. The lights were on in the living room, and he glimpsed Eleanor sitting in her favorite armchair, reading a book with a cup of tea beside her. The scene was so idyllic, so perfectly staged, that a wave of nausea hit him. Eleanor looked up from her book, her reading glasses slipping slightly down her nose. "Arthur, where have you been? And what is that smell? You're filthy!" Her voice was calm, but with a tone of reprimand Arthur knew well, the same tone she used to justify Clara's confinement. Arthur stopped, his breath ragged. The smell of the pigsty was a shield, a weapon. He didn't answer, just stared at her, his eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen before. Eleanor's serene smile faltered. "Arthur, what happened? You're frightening me," she said, closing the book and placing it on the coffee table. There was a slight tremor in her voice, but Arthur knew it was just another one of her acts. "You frighten me, Eleanor," he replied, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper, but laden with a veiled threat. "You frighten me more than anything in this world." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned abruptly and headed for the door leading to the garage. Eleanor stood up, her expression now one of genuine confusion and a touch of alarm. "Arthur, wait! Where are you going with that? That attitude, you're acting like a lunatic." He ignored her. He opened the garage door, the darkness inside almost total, but he fumbled for the switch and the fluorescent lights flickered on, revealing an organized space full of tools and gardening equipment. His eyes swept the shelves, looking for something that could break metal. Eleanor followed him to the door, stopping on the threshold, arms crossed. "What are you looking for, Arthur? And why do you smell so awful? Have you been in the pigsty again?" The last sentence was uttered with a tone of disdain, a reminder of the shame Clara represented. Arthur found what he needed, large, heavy bolt cutters with rubberized handles, perfect for chains. He grabbed them, feeling the cold weight of the metal in his hands, a weight that seemed to transfer new strength to him. "Yes, Eleanor," he said, turning to face her, the bolt cutters hanging in his hand like an extension of his fury. "I've been in the pigsty, and I saw what you did." Eleanor's face paled. Her smile vanished completely, replaced by a mask of shock and, for a brief instant, fear. "I don't know what you're talking about, Arthur. You're delirious." "Don't lie to me, Eleanor," Arthur's voice exploded, echoing in the garage. "I saw Clara. I saw the chain. I saw your special facility. But your virtue is a sham, a mask for your cruelty." He took a step towards her, the bolt cutters swinging. Eleanor recoiled, her eyes wide. "Arthur, you're frightening me. You're not thinking straight. It's for her own good, to protect her from the cruel world. Protect? You chained her like an animal. You left her to rot in that hole. That's not protection, Eleanor. It's torture. It's the vilest of prisons." Arthur's voice was laden with pain and rage, each word a blow. "I was a fool, blind, but no more, no more." Eleanor tried to regain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her panic. "Arthur, please, let's talk. You're upset, I understand, but we can't let emotions overwhelm us. Think about appearances. Think about our reputation." "Reputation?" Arthur laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "Your reputation is a lie, Eleanor, and I will expose every piece of it. But first, I will free my daughter." With the bolt cutters firmly in hand, Arthur turned and left the garage, leaving Eleanor behind, pale and trembling on the threshold. He didn't look back. His mission was clear. The truth would be exposed, no matter the cost. Arthur's last words to Eleanor were a declaration of war. He didn't wait for her reply, didn't spare another glance for the pale, trembling woman on the garage threshold. The bolt cutters, heavy and cold, were the only thing that mattered now, the only tool to undo the evil he had allowed. He ran back to the outbuilding, the stench of the pigsty on his clothes and in his nose no longer nauseating, but a constant reminder of the urgency. The night's darkness seemed deeper now, but Arthur didn't need light to find his way. His feet knew every inch of that ground, every stone, every irregularity. Rage propelled him, a raw and relentless energy. As he approached the outbuilding, he saw Corvus, the raven, perched on the low roof, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. The bird didn't caw, just watched, its black eyes seeming to approve Arthur's determination. It was as if the raven knew that justice was about to be served. Arthur pushed the door, which creaked softly. The smell inside was the same, but now he associated it with pain, not shame. Clara was exactly where he had left her, sitting on the ground, knees hugged, her gaze fixed on some invisible point. The chain still gleamed faintly in the gloom. "Clara," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He knelt before her, the heavy bolt cutters in his hands. "I'm back, my daughter. I'm going to get you out of here." Clara didn't react. Her eyes didn't move to him. Her apathy was a stronger blow than any scream or cry. It was the cruelest evidence of the extent of the damage. Arthur wasted no time. He leaned in, his heart pounding in his chest. The cold metal of the bolt cutters touched the rusted chain that fastened Clara's ankle. He positioned the blades, feeling the rough texture of the metal under his fingers. It was a thick chain, but the bolt cutters were robust. He squeezed. The sound was a dry, loud snap, echoing in the small space. Breaking the oppressive silence, the metal yielded with a groan, and the chain broke into two pieces. One piece fell to the ground with a dull thud. The other remained attached to Clara's ankle, but was now free from the post. Arthur felt an overwhelming relief, mixed with a deep pain. He had broken the chain, but the prison Eleanor had built in Clara's mind, that would be much harder to dismantle. He tossed the bolt cutters aside, the metallic sound reverberating. With trembling hands, he picked up the piece of chain still on Clara's ankle. It was heavy, cold. He removed it carefully, feeling his daughter's sensitive skin. There were red, abraded marks, silent evidence of the torment. "There, my dear," he murmured, holding her ankle gently. "You're free." Clara finally reacted. Her eyes moved not to Arthur, but to the piece of chain on the ground. A slight tremor ran through her body, almost imperceptible. She extended a pale hand and touched the broken metal as if she couldn't believe her liberation. Arthur felt tears well up in his eyes again. He couldn't expect a reaction of joy, an embrace. Just the absence of the chain was already a victory. "Come, Clara," he said softly, extending his hand to her. "Let's go home." He waited. Clara looked at his outstretched hand, then at the ground. The confusion in her eyes was palpable. She didn't move. Arthur knew it wouldn't be easy. Years of neglect and confinement wouldn't be erased in an instant. He knelt again, carefully picked Clara up in his arms, feeling the light, fragile weight of her body. She didn't resist, but she also didn't nestle. She remained stiff, like a doll. The smell of the pigsty, which had once suffocated him, was now a reminder of the battle he had won, and the war that was yet to come. He left the outbuilding, carrying his daughter, the door creaking softly behind them. Corvus was still on the roof, watching. The raven cawed, a sound that seemed to carry a mixture of triumph and warning. Arthur looked at the mansion, its lights gleaming in the darkness. Eleanor would be there, perhaps still in the garage, perhaps already in the living room, trying to process what had happened. Arthur's fury hadn't diminished. It had merely transformed into a cold, calculating determination. He needed to take Clara to a safe place, away from that stench, away from that horror. And then he would return for Eleanor. No more secrets, no more lies. The charade had come to an end. He held Clara a little closer, feeling the warmth of her body. That was the first step. The rest would come, and Eleanor would pay for every day, every hour, every minute his daughter had spent chained in that hell. Arthur emerged from the outbuilding, Clara's fragile body nestled in his arms. The night air, once a balm, now seemed to cut his skin, laden with the persistent stench of the pigsty that clung to him, and more painfully, to his daughter. Corvus, faithful sentinel, took flight from the roof with a low caw, circling once above them before landing on a nearby tree branch, his black eyes fixed on the scene as if overseeing the escape. The mansion, with its illuminated windows, seemed a beacon of hypocrisy in the darkness. Arthur avoided looking directly at it, his mind already charting the next step. Taking Clara into the main house with Eleanor lurking was unthinkable. He needed a sanctuary, a place where the stench and the memories of captivity could begin to dissipate, and where Clara would be truly safe. His eyes swept the property. There was a small guest house, rarely used, hidden among the trees further from the main house. It was simple, but clean and, most importantly, isolated. A plan began to form in his mind, a plan that would require caution and speed. "Come, my little one," he whispered to Clara, holding her a little tighter. She remained inert, her head resting on his shoulder, her eyes open but vacant. The absence of any reaction, of any crying or protest, was a silent testament to the depth of the trauma. Arthur felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost made him stumble. He had allowed this. His blindness, his cowardice, had chained his daughter as much as the metal chains. He began to walk, veering off the main path, opting for a less visible trail through the damp grass. Each step was deliberate, each muscle tense. Clara's weight in his arms was a constant reminder of his newfound responsibility. He could feel the faint warmth of her body, her shallow breath against his neck. It was real. She was there, free, but still trapped in her own mind. As he approached the guest house, he noticed a light come on in the living room window of the main mansion. Eleanor. She was moving, probably trying to understand what had happened, or perhaps already planning her next manipulation. Arthur quickened his pace, his heart pounding. He couldn't be seen. Not now. He reached the guest house door, unlocking it with a key he always kept with him, an old habit of precaution. The interior was dark and cool, with the faint smell of wood and dust. He fumbled for the switch, and the lights came on, revealing a cozy living room, a small bedroom, and a bathroom. It was simple, but it was a refuge. Carefully, Arthur carried Clara to the bedroom. There was a made bed, covered by a clean duvet. He laid her down gently, watching her. She didn't move, just lay there on her back, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I'll get you some water, Clara," he said, his voice soft, trying to infuse some normalcy into the chaos. He went to the bathroom, turned on the tap, and let the water run until it was cold. He filled a glass and returned to the bedroom. He knelt beside the bed, holding the glass. "Here, my daughter, try to drink a little." He brought the glass to her lips. Clara didn't open her mouth. Arthur tried again, patiently. Finally, with an almost imperceptible effort, she parted her lips slightly, and he managed to pour a few drops of water. She swallowed, a slow and difficult movement. Seeing that small victory, that minimal sign of life, filled Arthur with a painful hope. He helped her drink a little more, then put the glass aside. "I'll stay here with you, Clara," he promised, sitting on the edge of the bed. He took her hand, small and cold, and held it. The red marks on her ankle still tormented him. He needed to clean her, feed her, give her clean clothes, but for now, the priority was safety and presence. He knew the night would be long. The battle to rescue Clara from her mental prison would be even longer, but the determination that propelled him was unshakable. He looked at his daughter's hand, then at the window where Eleanor's mansion gleamed. The charade was over. The truth would be exposed, and Eleanor would pay. But first, he would take care of Clara. He promised himself he would never leave her alone again. Never again. Arthur, with Clara still asleep in his arms, felt the weight of responsibility and guilt crush him. The stench of the pigsty, which permeated his daughter's clothes and skin, was a poignant reminder of the barbarity she had been subjected to. He laid her with extreme care on the guest house's made bed, watching her for a moment. Her body seemed too small, fragile, almost ethereal under the clean duvet. The red marks on her ankle were just the tip of the iceberg. He knew the first step was to clean her. The idea that his daughter, his sweet Clara, had been kept in such filth was a dagger in his chest. He went to the bathroom, filled the bathtub with warm water, and added some mild soap. He returned to the bedroom, his heart heavy. "Clara," he whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Let's take a bath. You'll feel better." She didn't react, her eyes still fixed on the ceiling. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to contain the wave of despair. Gently, he began to undress Clara. Each piece of dirty clothing he removed revealed more of the extent of her suffering. Her pale skin was covered in caked-on dirt, and there were abrasions and bruises on her arms and legs, some old, some more recent. Arthur's stomach churned. He felt a cold, intense rage grow within him, directed at Eleanor. As he removed the last piece, he noticed Clara's extreme thinness. Her bones protruded beneath her skin, and her ribs were visible. She was malnourished, a shadow of the vibrant girl he remembered. Tears welled up in his eyes again, but he blinked them away, transforming the pain into determination. Carefully, he picked her up in his arms again. She remained inert, a dead weight, but Arthur held her like the most precious treasure. He carried her to the bathroom and gently placed her in the warm water. Clara's body relaxed slightly at the contact with the water, a small sign of relief that Arthur clung to desperately. He took a soft sponge and began to clean her. Each touch was an act of redemption, an attempt to wash away not only the physical dirt, but also the grime of neglect and cruelty. He washed her matted hair, feeling the smell of the pigsty mingle with the gentle scent of the soap. Clara made no sound, just allowed him to wash her, her eyes vacant. "It's all right, my daughter," he murmured, his voice choked. "Daddy's here. You're safe now." When he finished, he wrapped her in a soft towel and carried her back to the bedroom. He took a clean, soft pajama set he had found in the guest house closet and dressed her. Clara seemed a little more comfortable, the smell of soap replacing the previous stench. He laid her down on the bed again, covering her with the duvet. The marks on her ankles still were there, but now clean. He took a healing ointment he found in the bathroom cabinet and gently applied it to the wounds. "I'll get you something to eat, Clara," he said, his voice soft. "Something light." He went to the small guest house kitchen. He found some crackers and a little juice. He returned to the bedroom and tried to feed her, but Clara turned her face away. "Please, Clara," he pleaded, his heart aching. "Just a little bit." He managed to get her to nibble a tiny piece of cracker and drink a sip of juice, but it was a Herculean effort. Her refusal to eat was further proof of the deep damage. Arthur sat on the edge of the bed again, holding her hand. The silence of the room was broken only by Clara's soft breathing and the beating of his own heart. He looked out the window, where the main mansion still gleamed with its lights. Eleanor, her image with her facade of virtue, burned in his mind. He had rescued Clara from the pigsty, but the battle to bring her back to life, to heal the invisible wounds, would be long and arduous. And the battle against Eleanor, that would be the most brutal of all. He could no longer hide, could no longer be blind. The truth, raw and stark, needed to be exposed. "I swear, Clara," he whispered, kissing her forehead, "I swear I will never leave you alone again. And she will pay for all of this, for every day, every hour, every minute." The night wore on, but Arthur felt no sleepiness. He would remain there, vigilant by his daughter's side. The mansion, with its distant lights, seemed a stage for the approaching storm. The charade was over. Justice finally would be served.